just like the pandemic, there was a lot of myths when this thing started that we took to be truths. And now that we get down the road, we look back and say, oh man, why did we ever think that?
I'm Carolyn Cameron, pleased to be joined by Mark Spector, who is putting all of our home studios to shame in Val Quinton, Alberta. Poor you, you're on summer vacation, now all this Edmonton news.
Yeah, so much for summer vacation. Us hockey writers usually get most of July and some August off. I think it's flip-flop this year, isn't it?
I think so. So the focus right now is the expected hub cities for the Stanley Cup playoffs to be Edmonton and Toronto. How did it come to be two Canadian cities?
Well, I think, as we look back on this pandemic, Carolyn, and all things in our life, not just sports or just hockey, no one's been able to predict what's coming down the road here. I wish I'd have bought all that Amazon stock back in March, and that never happened. So, I think that as it's unfolded, they wanted to go to Vegas, and I get why. They had a 3,000 room hotel. The pandemic has deemed Vegas just a place you can't safely go at this point. And they wanted to go to Vancouver. And the health authorities of Vancouver said, you know what, we don't really agree with the plan you have. So by elimination, Edmonton, of all the NHL cities, I'm going to say, except for maybe Winnipeg, would have the least COVID because it's a small northern city. And Toronto becomes the safest eastern hub because, again, there's not many places in the States you want to take this show right now.
Well, and the Canadian dollar certainly helps the National Hockey League right now. Edmonton in particular, you mentioned the number of COVID cases and how it is a safer place to be right now. But other than that, what made Edmonton a good pick for a hub city?
Well, their infrastructure here is excellent, right? They've got, I think Detroit's rink is newer, but they would have the newest rink in hockey. They have a practice rink that is into the same roof. They have a JW Marriott across the street, not as big as the hotels in other cities, but once the qualifying round's over, they can get every player in the tournament inside the JW, which is in as high a quality as any of the hotels out there. And from that Marriott across the street from Rogers Place, you can walk outside or inside. They'll have walkways that are sealed off from the public. So the bubble will be very thorough. It's the COVID levels here are very, very low. They've got, the other thing I want to say, Carolyn, is the mental health issue, right? It became an issue in Vegas. One, the COVID numbers in Vegas made you think, I'm not going outside much. And the other thing is it's like 38, 40 degrees Celsius in Vegas. So that also says to me, I'm not going outside much. So you weren't sitting around pools in Vegas. You can in Edmonton. You can't golf in Vegas in the afternoon. A team can go on a golf outing in Edmonton. So the mental health of being able to go outside and kind of have somewhat of a normal life inside this bubble really favored Edmonton in this case.
And you mentioned that the Western Conference teams will be in Edmonton, the Eastern Conference teams in Toronto. Why go that route? Why allow home ice advantage if that even still exists?
It's funny. That was just like the pandemic. There was a lot of myths when this thing started that we took to be truths. And now that we get down the road, we look back and say, oh man, why did we ever think that? And that's one of them. I believe it was the general managers who initially came up and said, hey, we can't have the Leafs and the Oilers have an advantage, let's say, because they're playing in their home rink. But as the whole process has unfolded here, we've realized that, listen, Toronto has to be in an Eastern time zone. There's no professional sport in the world that would see fit to have the Bruins, the Rangers, the Flyers, Washington Capitals, Pittsburgh Penguins, Toronto Maple Leafs, 6 of the biggest TV markets in the National Hockey League and most important ones, play games that are scheduled to start at like 10 o'clock p.m. in their hometown. And if there's some overtimes in the game before, they might not start till 11. So it just, as a TV guy, and I would think you'd agree with me here, Carolyn, that it just I never saw fit that they would have two Pacific time zones and make the Leafs, they're not starting 9 a.m. games. The PA has said they weren't going to play before noon. So I just don't get how you could tell Toronto Maple Leafs fan, your game's supposed to start at 10 o'clock tonight, but it might not start till 11. It didn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm really into this new thing during quarantine called going to bed early. So I'll try and stick with that even when the playoffs come back. One other question that we have, and I know that there's still many out there looming without answers, is where's the Stanley Cup Final going to be played?
Well, once again, unfolding. So I know that when they started this process a long time, a month and a half ago, they said, look, let's get in the qualifying round. Let's get in round 1, round 2 in these hub cities, and then let's reevaluate. And maybe we'll be at a point where the Final Four, hey, back then we thought maybe we'll be able to put fans in the building by end of August, right? Early mid-September. Let's say we're starting the third round the first week of September. Maybe we could have fans in the building and go back to normal playoffs. Well, that's out the window. I don't think anyone feels like we're going to fill buildings with 18,000 people here in September. So as we recalibrate, I think it makes a lot of sense that in the end, you're probably not going to get a Stanley Cup Final with 2 teams where we go back and forth like we traditionally do. So let's, by process of elimination, if we're going to go to Toronto or we're going to go to Edmonton, let's choose between the 2. Well, the COVID-19 cases in the much larger Toronto region are like 14,000 cases. And in Edmonton, they're just over 1,000. So if we're going to make our decision based on the ability to get through this thing and hope the virus doesn't derail our process of getting in basically 5 rounds of playoffs, Carolyn, it seems pretty safe to me that if I'm picking between 2 centers, Toronto or Edmonton, I'll choose Edmonton and hope I have some luck.
Yeah, and that's still a far ways away, the Stanley Cup Final. We still have to get players reporting to training camp first and foremost in a safe manner. Spec, really appreciate the time. Enjoy your time and day on the lake.
I'll try to. Thanks, Carolyn.